Okay, that's fine.
But okay, but we're talking about technology and we're talking about the human face behind and with the technology and the dichotomy between the two.
Yeah.
A very rough summary.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for everyone attending and Ian as well for coming in now. This has been an interesting journey and that I want to reflect on. Firstly, by being immersed in the literature of 21st century educational challenges and learning, and being exposed to so many ideas. What I've been doing the last year, I used my Flipboard and all kind of other apps that I have and signed up in very interesting groups that promote 21st century learning and educational technologies, use of technologies, but also thinking of the person within the space and considering especially who our students are, where they come from. I had this huge quest around kind of understanding what the millennial is and millennial learning and if it applies to the South African context. And I have certain ideas about this that I can share with you afterwards. So we live in a landscape of 21st century technology enhanced learning, which happens to also be a theme at the Altasa conference in Durban later this year. And while I was doing this work, I was thinking about the different transitions that we have in higher education globally, but also in the South African context. And I was reflecting on what I experienced after the hashtag framework, a silence, but a silence for reflection and also thinking of this in terms of as a window of opportunity. And at our strategic department meeting at Sociology and Social Anthropology, for the last 10 years, one of the issues that always come up is the tutoring program and academic skills and students not meeting writing requirements or higher cognitive thinking skills. I got a bit fed up with nothing being done about that. So this is kind of the impetus that led me to think about this. It was a very interesting journey, but a journey that I shared with my students all the way, which was possible through blended learning technologies and interpersonal communication sessions that I had with them. So we are exposed to so many new apps. Willie, you could probably say we're moving beyond Web 2.0. We're going into 3.0, and I don't exactly understand what that means, but what is quite evident is that there's a lot of possibilities. This is a modified version of the Bloom's taxonomy that hasn't been conceivable before. So suddenly we have thousands of apps that could be used in a blended learning environment, and some of them that's been used by students anyway, but that we don't realize the potential thereof. That makes learning in the 21st century context a total different ballgame. One thing that will be shared with you is, for example, Bloom's digital taxonomy, where if we think about higher order thinking skills, and this is kind of our problem in the department, students not applying critical thinking when they write, when they present work, when they argue. And maybe this is alternatives, present alternatives for them to use. And I know some of you, Lauren and others, have been experimenting with blogging and other kinds of these technologies, and you could probably share a lot from your own experience. We also have Monet here, that's been our mother and guide on this journey in the faculty. So thank you so much for your assistance as well. But just looking at that, and I'm not going to focus in detail on that, but it provides a space to really think creatively about doing our assessment, the type of assignments that we give students differently. It all will, of course, depend on class size, etc., but there's different ways and methods and technology to make this possible. Communication is a key 21st century skill, and it underpins the approach here. There's a few other things that you can take note of. Of course, you will have the PowerPoint slide. I have such a lot of resources that I can share. It's a CD full, or a DVD full. But something that I just want to highlight is development of critical thinkers in the 21st century, being open-minded, engaged in problem solving, analyze, reason, evaluate, collaborate with others. Collaboration is really important. Reflection on learning, make real-world applications, think critically. Creativity is a very key component, and communicate clearly and accurately. And this is kind of the one that I was focusing on within the current and existing ICT infrastructure that's provided through Sunlearn. I'm not going to, we can respond to that further in the questions. Okay. So what I can briefly say is that if we could consider other platforms like what is provided by Microsoft and many other companies, we can enrich and expand our blended learning offer significantly. This is all I'm saying. That. But it seems that you understand what I kind of very subtly suggest. Smiling with me. Okay. One resource that I found very useful was a company, registered company, known as Partnership for 21st Century Learning. When you get my slides, everything is hyperlinked. You can just click on the links. And the lesson that I learned from the American education system is that thinking goes beyond higher education, and it involves the restructuring of the whole education system, meaning from primary, secondary, tertiary focus and the whole scope of education. It kind of points to how we phrase quite often the problems we experience with students. It's like students are perhaps not prepared adequately at school level. Some people would argue. Other people would argue that quite a lot of work has to be put into, or effort made to acquire academic skills as we define it. But quite often these questions are not critically reviewed. And what is very clear is that we need to look at the whole system through whatever mechanisms we already have, and to be more critical about the questions or the statements that we make when we want to give the school system the fault, or whatever the case might be. So what we need to consider is education is changing, and this is kind of reflective notes on the United States system. Competition is changing internationally. The workplace, job and skills demands are changing. For me in the discipline, these are the kinds of things that's very important. If I think on a more micro level of what do we want our sociology and social anthropology students to achieve, are we preparing them to go into honors and other postgraduate programs? No, because we have 600-700 students from a diverse range of degrees. We are lucky to have 20 honors students. Half of them come from other universities. So that can't be a realistic objective, you know. So should we broaden our objective? These are kind of critical questions that emerge from this. But in the discipline, and the sociological associations and anthropology associations, it's very clear what is expected of undergraduate students in sociology and social anthropology globally, and what's the kind of competencies and skills to enable them to enter the workplace, which allows for them to continue their education at a time when it becomes more affordable, perhaps, for them to do. This is what I really like about the Argentinian education system. I was lucky to visit them 2 years ago and to see that they don't have any barriers. You can study and intermittently continue at a later stage. You don't lose your credits because they assume that people are also working. It's kind of more realistic, embedded in the social fabric of the society. So, but these are kind of guiding things that you have to consider as kind of foregrounding these arguments. The paper that we're going to share with you, and it's kind of a bonus one. I had to select one. It's a 3-in-1. Okay. Is about student fees, undergraduate education, and the doctorate system in South Africa. Another one that I want to highlight is universities around the world should share notes as they face the same challenges, written as an op-ed piece by Formink. And then the Center for Higher Education Trust have a fantastic range of articles to read that will assist you in kind of restructuring and finding a basis for why you want to kind of change your curriculum. And these aspects are very, very important. What matters to students is the focus of the first paper in this free package. And the key three things that stand out is how to sustain the financing of higher education institutions, debates regarding free education, and the decolonization and or the inclusion of indigenous knowledge in curricula of all universities. Written by Butler Adam. The second one by Jimmy. He was in a position last year or early this year to visit some of the top universities, and what he recognized was that even though we need to find specific ways to connect, and quite often it's through technology, that we will still have to focus on the person. And his statement is particular, or some of the key arguments is massification is going to stay, and we have to address access inequalities. But what happens when we broaden access is an increase in diversity, and it doesn't go without disruption. It's kind of a normal process. There will be disruption as soon as we open up and broaden access. And university responds through curriculum renewal and funding, equity, while sustaining excellence, remains one of our key challenges. And this is kind of really important for me to have justified why am I doing what I'm doing. I also had to consider the institutional context and was guided by our key policy documents. In teaching and learning, there's 8 or 9 smaller policy documents, but from these from our institutional intent, our strategic framework, it's 2000 document, there's key things that remain, and with links very clearly to the previous readings. Increase and broadening access, maintain success rate, enhance societal impact. These are kind of challenging things. How do you do it in a curriculum on a module level? You know, programs that are relevant, so it calls for program and curriculum renewal. Blend information and communication technologies with a sound tertiary educational pedagogy with focus on learning and not just on teaching. And this is really what I try to do. I told students constantly that, listen, my teaching is not important. The learning is core to whatever we do. It's about the learning as a core focus the last semester. And then there's also a few others, increased diversity, and then the policies. it's important to really have a look at these again. Okay, now I'm getting warm. I need to take my jacket. Okay. So that was part one. Okay. Part two, making it work. We were using a British text, and before that, American one, before that, a British one, and before that, and so I'm talking about 5-year intervals. It shows my age and how long I've been at the department. Okay, so this year we adopted a South African text that was written specifically with having first-year sociology and anthropology students in mind. What I liked about the text, and I play a key role in selecting content or academic texts for the first year, is that it was adopting a phronetic approach to teaching and learning. Who can tell me what a phronetic approach is? So it was very interesting. I like that answer. It is very interesting that one of the editors of the book, Paul Stewart, who was working at WITS in 2003, when they went through restructuring and having challenges that we didn't have at Stellenbosch really to that extent. What we had at Stellenbosch the last 2 years kind of mirrored what happened then. They had to come up with, they had less tutors, they had less resources, less lecturers, to come up with a kind of approach that would foster the teaching of social theory in sociology. Because sociology is very particular. We expose our first years to social theory and research in week 1. These are core fundamentals to understand what is meant by the sociological imagination and what sociology and anthropology as disciplines entail. So what I've decided then, and since we don't have a faculty-wide academic skills development course, we have the only compulsory component is information skills. That's the tip of the iceberg. And I'm talking about a huge iceberg of what 21st century knowledge, competencies and skills is about. We really need to get rid of that and get into what is really required by students. Okay, so what I did then is I decided I'm going to design a standalone academic skills development module focused on 21st century knowledge competencies and using a blended learning approach. And this is where Renee came in with the most fantastic resource and access that she uploaded for us for the department to use, and which was really, really helpful. And I took cognizance of the guiding literature and praxis elsewhere of academic skills development at leading HE institutions. One thing we had a new colleague in the department, Dennis Francis, was Vice Dean of Education at Free State, and it opened up a space collegially for us also to talk about NQF level descriptors, outcomes, how to take it really seriously, and I decided to align my assessment with that. And it's fantastic because in the first, I'm responsible for the statistical analysis of the marks as well, and for the first time I'm noting a change. There's something different, which I'm very excited about, because of the way the marks are distributed. So I have, out of 60, for example, 8 very difficult questions. You have to be competent to answer them. Even though they are all multiple choice, I got what I wanted. I scaffolded it so as to allow to have a nice distribution and to know that we've done something right. I can illustrate it statistically. Good. So, where did I learn from? Being cognizant of what is happening at other institutions. That was probably most productive time that I spent going directly through what people publish online about new technologies, and very subtly companies trying to promote their products. One feels a bit overwhelmed, but as soon as I go into what is happening actually at certain universities, now I mainly looked at universities in the global south, for some reason, I don't know why, but I found it very, very insightful. One thing that's prominent is that 21st century knowledge skills is most often a joint effort between the institution's library as key knowledge hub and individual departments. So it's not in a silo approach to what every department does, what every faculty does. The knowledge hub is central, and it fits in a very good space for me where knowledge is kind of centralized in a very interesting way, and that's in libraries and the kind of function that libraries have. Academic skills cater for, and this is another interesting revelation, different undergraduate year levels. So there's for those entering university, very specific assistance for the second year, for the third year, for the postgraduate student, and for the academic, the scholar. A whole range of opportunities, etc. What is very clear is that people who work in this environment are similarly qualified as our CTL staff, and there's obviously then a very close linkage. But the space in which this happens and the responsibility center seems to be in a library, which is in a wider sense also incorporated with the CTL component. So it's not linked to a faculty, it's not linked to a department, it's kind of a deep politicized space, which is interesting, okay? So delivery of a whole range of content happens online or blended. It's face-to-face, individual or in small groups. What I do find extremely interesting is that if we think about wellness, in wellness, mental health, and all these aspects are included. So if you have an anxiety disorder or some other kind of mental health profile, there will be special groups focusing on your learning needs to ensure that your anxiety doesn't prevent you from achieving your educational outcomes. It's fantastic. And one university that's very good with that is University of Victoria. So it's integrating support systems in a very interesting way, which still seems to be like silos at our institution, with all of these 21st century skills centralized and taking it out of departments. But departments are very closely linked, because at some stage, for example in sociology, you would have kind of a generic focus that on skills, academic skills, competencies that everyone should have, but then when there's specific things, there would be a link to writing an essay, academic essay in sociology and social anthropology. So it moves into the department workspace, but it comes from the central hub. So something I really wanted to highlight there. So what I did, and I started ambitiously, Monet very subtly suggested, maybe break it up a bit. Okay. So I used the online lesson tool mostly on SumLearn, and to develop 3 online tutorials that kind of focused on different times during the semester. And I had to take a lot of his other content in consideration. The first part was really focusing on adapting to the university space. First year, first semester, new study patterns at university level. This had about 10 sub-lessons, okay? Engaging them with materials, or where they watched the video, where they answered questions, and where they could then, when they complete that activity, go to the next activity. This is typically how it works. Then the focus was on effective reading, and I had different kinds of format, different kinds of texts, how to read it differently, and I focused on, and which was very important, to bring in the textbook that they were using. You'll see that I kind of phrase it as still a bit of a challenge. Then listening and note-taking. But at the same time, this is just, again, there was like 10, 15 different components to that, from illustrating them, or illustrating how they can use mind maps, C maps, or different kinds of technologies, or whatever they prefer. Either writing it, drawing it, being creative, or by using apps. And I encourage them to come to me and say, but if you discover a new app, let's share it with the class. Come and tell us how you did it. So every lecture, the 50-minute lecture, would definitely not spend on subject concepts. I spend at least 20 minutes per lecture on these kinds of stuff. And talking about what it means to be here. But linking it to the work. The second tutorial was when they started reading more critically. So I can actually summarize the whole first semester tutorials were about reading different kinds of text, interpretation, thinking, and not focused on writing necessarily what I initially planned. I'm going to start with writing. So if I print out each of these lessons, it's between 50 and 70 pages, which I realized only later on, and I was like translating it to Afrikaans at the same time while I was making it. That's a bit of a challenge for an individual, which kind of left me not meeting other obligations because this was my passion. Okay. The other one was fake news, academic journals, exposing them to a whole range of topics. Why does fake news exist? And bringing in kind of the US elections, all the kind of contextual stuff that's happening currently, whether it was State of the Nation address, whatever the kind of context was, my purpose was not to teach, but to make students excited about all the information and knowledge and stuff that's out there to discover, but then to develop that critical skill of discerning what is good quality content and what is not. And that was also the other major focus. Interesting one, when I started with plagiarism, there was a wonderful opportunity to expose literature on how many lecturers plagiarize, and looking at statistics around that, and then how they fall prey to false or fake journals. And some of our prominent scholars in the faculty has been in that position as well. And but they don't talk about it because it's really hugely embarrassing. But it's a real 21st century concern. At the same time, I'm continuing with my lessons, and I'm discussing what was considered to be the key global issues at Davos discussed by the World Economic Forum. And I'm integrating these things. So one thing that is very clear was a gap that was existing in my prior research in the general knowledge of students. And this is something that I hope I somehow addressed. And I provided them with the tools to become active citizens, to link up to a VAS, to join about 8-9 different social activist groups. To say if you're passionate about sociology and anthropology, then you must join this. we must, if you're not the type of person that's going to toy on the road plane, but you still feel you want to voice or contribute, this is another way of doing it. Okay. So in the second semester, we'll begin to focus, build from this, and begin to focus on a whole range of other academic skills, and also what is needed in the second year. Because we are challenged in the second year, we've been funded with teaching development grants, that grant, which is no longer, and how are we going to do it in the future? And I think this kind of solution will work better. I don't need a lot of tutors to do this. But tutors are also important because students need to connect. So what do we need? Maybe 30 mentors from the third year. So that could be paid so much. You can afford it maybe in other means. Or it could become a requirement for competitive application for honours. There's many creative ways of doing it, folks. Good. So, to providing, one of the key things was this new South African textbook that which was the required text for both. We are lucky to have Introduction to Sociology and Social Anthropology. So we introduced two disciplines at the same time. Various tensions we have, different ways of looking, understanding, conceptually, etc., and methodologically. But to provide this key line of higher education debates, pedagogy, and a broader vision of awareness by exposure to world events and media content. I ask students if they are doing more language subjects, subscribe to Arts and Letters Daily. Do the Mail and Guardian online. The latest one was New York Times with very cheap subscription, which a lot of them did as well. The Conversation, Daily Maverick, University World News, World Economic Forum. These are some examples where students got on the mailing list and started engaging what is happening in the world. What's interesting is quite often when I get queries now after the exam, students will not ask about their marks only, but they have the confidence to comment in, is an online exam perhaps the best way? Because this reading, and that I like, there's this advancement. So the challenge remains incorporating current context, debates, opinions, with module-specific content, and improving fluidity between kind of academic skills related and subject-specific content. What this means, we will have a core curriculum that we want to introduce to students, this introduction to your discipline. At the same time, there's a need to expose students to what is happening in the world and to actually kind of change the habit and prioritize it in their everyday task. And at the same time, there's kind of those other challenges presented by assessment or admin or time limitations, etc. So to balance this is important. Not one student complained that they spent extra time, but it was a huge effort. It seems overwhelmingly that they welcomed this new standalone, which I call standalone, but it was actually well integrated with what I intended to do. So I want to end there. I have such a lot of content, so it was kind of a challenge. So I hope to unpack it in more detail in a workshop at Soto later this year. Because there's a lot of different elements that one can look at.
Jacob, thanks very much. I think we can give you a hand. Thank you. I think I learned a lot from what you've said, and it seems to me that it's an excellent example of how one can integrate academic literacy into content-specific modules, and also how you can prepare your students for lifelong learning and integrate graduate attributes at the same time. It serves a whole number of purposes. So really, well done. It must have taken a lot of preparation and input from you to prepare this.
Well, can I comment on that?
You don't have to.
I would like to comment on that.
Yeah.
It re-sparked my interest in teaching and learning by going through this process. So
It's great.
it's actually great to be asked to do something, or also to get fed up with no one doing anything for so many years. Where are we going?
What are some questions?
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's very interesting. I think you can just go back to your Bloom's taxonomy and there's a lot of detail, but maybe you can just help us with, obviously there's a lot of work to put down, the apps. I see there's a lot of apps.
Oh yes. No. There is such a lot of apps here, and you definitely have to explore how each of these are used and in what context. It's now very difficult for you to see them. But what is quite evident is if you look at, and I can actually only see from here, the quality of the image I found is that block, for example, is just on reflective writing. And the apps that you can use to produce reflective writing is about 30 in the market. And most probably going to expand more and more. So it's in a competitive space. I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, we've got this massive range, and the best way to assess these apps is actually to take into consideration how easy they are to use, and look at case studies of other businesses that use them and compare them. And as I've said, they will be changing continually, so we can be comfortable with exploring them.
Do you find that they're really helpful?
Some more than others.
Because I suppose we also in the position to give some guidance on what, otherwise I think we'll just sit the whole day on figuring out.
Ideally, you would give your attention to the situation one or two years. Also taking into account whether they use a smartphone or computer, doesn't work well on Sunday, things like that.
The interesting thing from that 21st P company, or that site, is that universities, on one of their strategic documents, should use that kind of Finlo funding and allocate funding for testing these kind of apps and technologies. A lot of them are free, and our information technology does testing, but it's slow.
I think there is a space for us when it comes to what we can aim for, to be able to share with each other among departments. We know nobody knows what a good app will give you. So you just everybody and we know about Twitter. Otherwise everybody's just fighting over their own corner in their own silo. We know academics do not have the time to go through 12 apps a day.
But this provides space for community to practice. And we have that.
Yeah. We just need to work with it more.
Yeah.
That's part of what we do.
And maybe also this little problem with the policy that's come to. Is that anything we're allowed, any place we're allowed to material is any other contact share materials actually legal. We ran up into that. But you can't share information directly to YouTube. You can't upload a video directly to YouTube. It has to be linked to somewhere to be legal. The university actually owns your information. Yeah. Yes.
So intellectual property rights.
Yeah.
One of the things that we also ran into face first. When we tried it in the classroom, I would just ask everything was good, but that's.
Yeah, we tried to make a community practice.
So we presented an avenue for open discussion at the SOTL place like that. Because my concern is, when I read through the literature and what's happening worldwide, is there is a new generation of millennials, and I think our South African students lag behind with our education system in history and context. But there's a new generation of millennials coming to our university. The kids that's now 3, 4, 5 years old, they're going to be South African millennials. As you understand it in the literature, I want to say something about it. Then they are so tech savvy that using all the apps on Microsoft, etc. It's the little kids who hack their parents' passwords to access a game, and we're going to be in huge trouble. So we need to start doing what you want to do where there's barriers, and we need to overcome the intellectual property rights.
I think you made a very good point also about academic literacy skills, not only for first sectors but up to scholars and academics. I think that's a language and skill that we need to continually develop, and there isn't actually a resource for that at the moment.
It's a challenge, but I would still support the idea of to get 10 years to be fully employed, do what some of our colleagues in the global north do. Yeah, the teaching the global. Agree. The postgraduate qualification at least. But that's walking in dangerous territory. But a key aspect of 21st century knowledge and skills is lifelong learning. That's a key characteristic, so it's something we have to embrace, all of us, in this space.
So we have the information skills, right, about learning, and with the fairly, populated numbers, I understand. And then on the other hand, we have this module that is developed for sociology that is really fairly generic, right? And a lot of the things that we talk about is directly related to linguistics, what is the difference between fake news and real news. It is an issue of linguistics as well, right? It's also an issue of psychology. What are the fake news creators using to lure your in? So it cuts across various, if you look at Trump, linguistically he's fascinating. I know this is as well, but and he's making history, so I see at least, we have philosophy, we have at least 4 departments who can look at what he's doing. So is it possible, can we start a discussion about moving a module such as this into vacant time slots? Because this is information skills. It started with our kids come here and they don't know how to switch on a computer. We've moved past that, right? Our kids come here, they know how to switch on a computer. They don't know how to switch it on for learning. They know how to switch it on for teaching, for watching stuff, but they don't know how to switch it on for learning. So can we maybe at some stage start a conversation about using those time slots in a manner that benefits I want to say the faculty, but this is fairly generic. You look at what economic students for at some point one of the examination questions was what is the place really conduct? You had to read the newspaper or go online to read economists. Are you interested in this? So like you refer them to the conversation, they will refer them to the economist. So it's, we can easily tweak it to make it discipline specific. So I'm just putting it out there.
Well, I want to definitely support is providing them with op-eds and making them aware of different kinds of disciplines, speaking to the same kind of topics. It's really, really fundamental on the first year. On terms of the module that perhaps are relevant in the 21st century anymore, I would be glad if someone joins me in this fight. that I have for many years of highlighting the problem. The political issue is doing to the department to get income for students, but we are in a phase of restructuring programs to curricula. And we need to address that. You can't have a department playing a political game or a department survival shouldn't be at the cost of the overall academic program. So hard decisions will have to be made, and we need to move forward. And so if you want to join the voice, please do that.
We had discussions in our department about that. They do need the computer skills, but we need to work, we also work very closely with the extended degree program where they are saying, well, let's talk about the underprepared student, the deficits, the schools, varying skills, and how do we harness them? Those who come in with bad schooling, they have other skills that you need, that they already have, that the cushioned, academically well-prepared do not necessarily get that, such as, okay, which one's good? Yes.
No, it's extremely valuable.
And then in our department, we were also fed up with the level of debate about social issues on campus in general, but specifically because we're linguistics, the language issue. Right? The same nonsense being said by different people every year, new students perpetuating the cycle of uncritical, opinionated rubbish and calling it fact, which is not a we then instituted a section on that. This is popular opinion. This is what linguistic science has to say about it. And we thought that type of thinking should also actually go into something like information skills. How do you deal with popular, actually, the big women from the linguistics point of view, which is that speciality, but how do you look at social issues? Because you're training to be a scholar of sorts, that's why you're here, and that gives you responsibility, and you have to start separating personal conviction from research. So I think there's a lot of various ways of populating the information skills in a more sensible way, and we have been talking about that extensively, so we'll support that. This is something our students basically need.
I was surprised. We had an online exam for 80 students writing for the first time. The only thing that went wrong was someone's mouse didn't work. She unplugged it, plugged it in again, continued. Fresh mouse. Only one student preferred to do a handwritten paper.
And that is
the rest were fine. At the end of the day, it was different in the second year, where we had the same online exam with written work. It was done a bit differently, but more students opted for writing. There's also the confidence that we instill in the students. I didn't make an issue of it, and they learned it. We shouldn't underestimate our students' capacity. So that's why I'm very supportive of asset-based approaches to teaching and learning. Forget about it. And we can't generalize based on, there's so many variables. Where students come from, who they are, etc. Different intelligence, etc. We can't base our arguments on that.
Because this is a reflection of our society, and we talk about diversifying, yes, that means socioeconomic diversity, it means linguistic and cultural diversity, and it's our responsibility as lecturers to harness that and use that for the good of the fact that you are a diverse first year sociology and social anthropology class, right? That should be an asset instead of a problem that we
solving and grade you according to ability. And what about celebrating diversity? We're starting to manage that in linguistics, where it's wonderful to have a diverse class and you can say, right. So could you give me an example of, and even a question, they do, and it's as soon as we start seeing it as a resource, then we lose the deficit. Some students do need extra help, right?
And this is what I think we should scaffold it in such a way. But I'm also telling the students, listen, this is where you are now. So after each mini assessment, the whole class gets a distribution, and I tell them they can move anywhere. You know, so it's not fixed, and I see a shift. My pass rate would be around 98% for the module, 600 students. And they did much more work than last year. Pass rate was around 95. What I did find was that usually the exams like 10% lower than the pass mark. This year the exams were higher. First time in 15 years. And I can't explain exactly what it is, but we need more research. We need to quantify it.
It's probably real learning technique that right? So previously, do this assessment, forget about it. Do this assessment, forget. Some of it remains in it. Before the exam, I have to refresh everything. And now it's probably real learning that took place. So when you spend time preparing for the exam, you actually polish what you need instead of to grab it back, from where it slips out of your mind.
But in this evaluation framework we have currently, we have to prove it.
Yeah.
And so I don't have time for the research. Okay, excellent. Yes.
Yes.
Two things. One has been the success of it. I think we said it was 600
students.
How do you?
At the end, we were kind of conventional tutorials. Somehow didn't work because suddenly students did all the online activities, and the tutors that we did for the semester became available, and I integrated in this that I had to go and see the tutor. So for one-on-one contact or intergroup, small group contact. So I could actually use my tutors, and it doesn't have to be master students anymore, but they model success in the disciplines. But I had and I didn't distinguish in the end, between tutors and mentors. Everyone with tutors, irrespective of whether they were third year, masters, honors, and they will become allocated to each of them about 40 students. And they were responsible for tracking those 40 students, apart from the fact that Sunlearn does provide good tracking options. Monitoring, tracking, getting to know them. What would have been great if we had a student society in the discipline and could have taken the excitement further. But the reality is we have students from different faculties. It's kind of a service module on a certain level. Because we don't have a degree in sociology, only honors.
The last point, I think
Yes.
it was on your last slide,
Yeah.
right? Something around mediator and students understand voices. I'm not sure what you meant.
These were part of the. Sorry, I didn't perhaps speak to that. Apart from
Simple mediator.
exposing students to the online content that come to their mailboxes, I expose them to op-ed pieces on teaching and learning and academic skills related. So there was a very interesting article for students whose first language is African languages to use this kind of English. And it was a small op-ed piece for 2 or 3 pages, maybe 2 even, and which I expose students to. I expose them to action learning, different pedagogies, collaborative learning, that trying to set up study groups, and but expose them to pedagogy and to learning educational practices. Because they have the right to understand why we are doing things like the way we are doing it. And this is the current pedagogy. And I think it's kind of empowering to do it in that way. So those are just a few examples of the academic skills related readings that wasn't assessed, but that I referred to, that was uploaded every week. As soon as there's something new, I would say there's a new exciting one to read. You know? And this is really interesting. I would perhaps take one micro moment to reflect on it and then maybe ask a question and then I continue with my work. So kind of multitask. But this was the other way of introducing students. Sometimes I integrated it in the blended learning ones. So also there's a lot of content online available on so-called learning styles. And then I would say that the neuroscientists say it's nonsense because of these reasons. So I would give it to them and then I would debunk it. And that's an interesting way to introduce them to critical thinking. So there's various ways you can approach it. I would say, no, you must be a green learner, you must be a blue learner, that kind of thing. And then it's nonsense. Depends on the evidence and depends on where the information is coming from. Or whether someone is making you a lot of money. What is?
Yeah, last question.
Okay.
I'm from the sociology department, and we work closely with the information industry. To what extent did you use the library as
To what extent did I use it?
in the process?
What I did is I scanned the whole library website. I spoke to my subject advisor, and then when I compared what was happening at other institutions, what I did is I created a whole folder of content and theme that I'm going to use within the next 2 weeks to start up a conversation with the library. And saying, listen, this is happening, and this is how I think, but I can't do this individually. You kind of have to do it strategically, but I'm going to stop. It maybe still play a kind of role, but this is the library. You need to have a very central hub, and the brain is logically the information and knowledge exchange happen. It's a repository, it's where everything is stored. There's a lot of competency, and that's really, really, really important. And I don't say any unit or anything needs to change, we just have to recognize and identify essentially the importance of that as a resource. And we can't, I can conclude by saying what I attempted as individual is totally unrealistic. It took so much of my time. And I often find myself in a situation where I say to students, this online class is going to be available tomorrow, then it's only available the evening. But I felt extremely guilty because it was impossible for me on my own to produce such a lot of content and material. So this is the other thing that I want to flag. Not everything can be great and positive. This was really putting strain on me. But it was worthwhile as a learning experience.
Right, well I think that's a very good point to end off on. Thank you very much.
Okay, pleasure. Thank you. Again. Wonderful.
Yes.
Again. I have another one. This is beautiful.
Much appreciated. Okay, the presentation will be available as a podcast on the Auckland website. It's part of the CPL website. The slides will also be there, and yeah, if you don't mind just completing the feedback form for us, please, for the Skills Fund purposes. Thank you. And please take some potholes for the road back, or no, wherever you are going. It's not slipped over. And water.
Jacob, would you mind if we give your contact details to other lecturers that we know are trying to work on something similar?
That would be wonderful.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Stefan in the law faculty today is busy with something similar, so this is a perfect timing.
I've been working with Stefan before and
Workshop, you see. We need a workshop.
It would be very interesting to have a workshop where dozens of people of us who have been working on this kind of thing present certain sections.
Why not?
It could be really insightful. So maybe we should put it together. Yeah. And I want the library to be very central with it as well.
That will be great because all my colleagues can be doing and we are in the process of developing podcasts and all kinds of things step by step into to integrate with courses.
I remember the years when we were closing library sciences department in our faculty. And not realizing that information literacy, information science, knowledge, careers, it was short-sighted. But this is why it opens up. You can function as a school. You have all the scholarly knowledge. And that's cool.
It will be great because we're working with all the faculties and the departments getting things in place. The students get information.
Because where's the logical place for students go to? The library.
I mean, if just years go for that first reduction, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, but I just think it's pulled us through, into subsequent studies. Because I think that's
Very interesting to see what's happening.
yeah. Because it's when you can't do it for 1 year and then you sort of let them go. And you might get the
Want hulle kom almal nou lank na almal voor my en dan sê hulle nou die probleem is ons toelatingsprys. Dis in jou later. Ek gaan die kontrak weet ons is al besig om natuurwetenskapse ding te trek, ons is besig om ingenieurs te dink, want ons probeer so 'n strategie as moontlik om ons studente. Die vlakke laer.
Maar dat is fantastisch wat gebeur oral, né? As ons net hierdie goed uitmerk.
Ja, en kyk
Is dit al reg?
ons gebruik en
Ja.
leen en
Nee, dis plesier, dit was lekker. Nee, dis kan ek maar stop.
Jy kan maar stop.